Hey everybody, welcome to Raising Vibrations, and you're with Simon today. So, in today's video, I am going to be following up on a video I did roughly a year ago, just probably over a year ago, that was called How to Deal with Pluto Transits. And it was, in my eyes, a fairly successful video in the sense that a lot of people could relate to what I was talking about there and could get a deep sense of understanding about how Pluto materializes itself, how it enacts itself within our experience of life, and essentially how we could actually work consciously with Pluto through our lives. So I think before we kind of go into what I want to talk about today in this video, let's just quickly recap, okay? So in the first video, my main goal was to show you that Pluto is a psychological and emotional metamorphosis that takes place within your life, okay? And one of the ways that I like to explain how this metaphor works of change, you come into this life and the placement of Pluto will tell you where something has deeply bloomed into your consciousness, okay? Something has deeply bloomed into your consciousness. And so the soul has a direct correlation at a very, very deep level, has the fixation and attachment to this aspect of life, reality, this karmic pattern of story that you're in, has this attachment, right? And you experience this as this core message, this core expression, this core experience of your life, right? Depending on where Pluto is. So Pluto's in your fifth house, and so, having Pluto in the fifth house would mean that this bloom that has taken place has been a deep psychological, emotional fixation to what is my purpose. I have a sense of destiny and I want to fulfill that. I want to shine, I want to take up stage, right? Pluto in the fifth. And then so as you kind of go through your life, you experience a myriad of challenges like abandonment, betrayal, loss, and we relate to these experiences oftentimes in very painful ways. And so in terms of this bloomed experience, here Pluto also reflects the dying process of this bloomed creative expression. And so there is a dying process that takes place, right? And that dying process is reflected in our reality as the culmination or ending of things. So we'll have our sights set on something emotionally and psychologically. For most of us, we're not even conscious of the fact that that's what's actually occurring. We just see it as, oh, this is our life. You go through your life and then you hit experiences that progressively kill off these things. And what's disturbing is our desire to want to reinforce them. Like, no, I don't want this to end. I don't want this to be the case, but you can't change that. And so what we have is this tension between letting go and processing through deep grief and the recognition of something new, wanting to renew itself. So we go through this process of the flower dying, right? In this case, right? It's bloomed into beautiful existence and then it begins to die. And so we experience that loss, betrayal, abandonment, grief, trying to make sense of things. And eventually, at some point, there is a opening up in which there is an emergence of a new desire. There's an emergence of a new set of experiences, a new blooming that is wanting to occur. And so this process of Pluto and our life, the correlation between our life and Pluto, which symbolizes this metamorphosis within our life, the placement of Pluto and the challenges that you face with it, Pluto conjunct the South Node, Pluto hit the Ascendant, Pluto hits the 10th house, Pluto hits your Sun. These are all aspects or phases in your life that trigger this deep metamorphosis process, okay? So the idea here with the first video is to really kind of help us understand that a lot of the time, these very challenging, painful, and deeply confusing experiences can be seen through this lens of metamorphosis, and they may not necessarily be fun to accept and deal with. They are also there on a deeper level for necessary change. And it's wrestling with that within ourselves that I think is the relief I'm trying to offer with this set of videos. Okay, so if you haven't watched that video, I highly encourage you to go watch that first. It's description for that. The video is in the description. You can watch that first, all right? So that then when you come to this video, you're like, I understand. Okay, so in this video, what I wanted to do was say, okay, well, what happens when Pluto hits the ascendant? What happens when Pluto hits the IC, the DC, and the MC, okay? And I'm thinking of breaking this up into a few more videos that hopefully won't take a year for each creation. But the way that I see it is that let's look at those 4 aspects, those 4 angles, and then we'll go with Sun, Moon, Mercury, okay? And then Jupiter, we'll go with Mars, Venus, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune, okay? Also 3 videos plus this one, so four videos I'll create in total, covering all of these aspects. All right. Okay, so when Pluto hits the angles, which is when Pluto hits your ascendant, otherwise known as the rising sign, when Pluto hits your 4th house, otherwise known as the IC, when Pluto hits your 7th house, otherwise known as the DC, and when Pluto hits your MC, otherwise known as the 10th house. Flipped it around there for a second. Okay, when it hits these angles, you can be absolutely reassured that your life is going to change. Just the way it is, right? When it hits these critical points, something is going to change for you. And, you know, maybe at some point I could do a lecture on and go really in depth on why these changes take place specifically on the angles. I'm going to summarize it today, but I'm just thinking about what that would look like and kind of the ideas that come through. So why is it significant on the angles? Because the angles themselves, all right, when operating together, because they obviously do, reflects the emotional and psychological process of identity integration. Okay? It reflects the emotional and psychological process of identity integration. Why? The ascendant is how I meet each moment instinctually. This then comes to a sense of how did I relate to that? Right? How am I emotionally experiencing this moment? And so we form a sense of it. We describe it as, wow, that was intense. That was fun. That was sad, right? We label it with an emotion. We identify with that experience. And then we get to the DC and we start to understand our relation to it. And we go, oh, okay, well, I liked this. This was fun and I can share it with people. And then when the energy moves to the Capricorn, the 10th house, we form definition around it. We structure it, we crystallize it. And then when it gets back to the AC again, we associate this experience as identity. Okay? So when Pluto hits any of the angles, it immediately begins to transform, disrupt, remove structured identities that we have internally within ourselves, right? How we identify ourselves, how we experience ourselves, how we relate to the world, how we crystallize things. It shifts it. It starts to push that button and say, so Pluto on the AC, the ascendant, comes over from the 12th house onto the ascendant, and all you want to feel is just like this, oh, I want to break out. I want to break out. Something new has to happen, okay? And it's a feeling of wanting to action something in your life, to do something, right? This instinct is pushing you to drive to begin a new cycle, essentially. And it can be very disturbing psychologically because up until this point, your life has been, this is what I'm doing, this is what I'm doing. Most people actually, when Pluto hits the ascendant, actually feel a deep sense of emptiness that needs to be fulfilled in some way. And so when it hits the ascendant, progressively moves to the first house, there's this underlying sense of, I'm starting to figure things out. I don't know where I'm going, but I got to try it out because I don't want to go back, right? That's that relationship between ending and new. So if you are having or going to have Pluto across your ascendant, my advice to you is to understand that these natural changes that will take place in your life are, again, natural, normal, and they may ask you to do things that you never even considered. Okay, to be open to that, to be very open to these new experiences. All right, you are meant to begin exploring yourself in a completely new way. So give that freedom, right? Often it feels like taking a risk. Often at times it feels like doing something completely different that you're not comfortable with. Do it anyway, okay? All right. When Pluto hits your IC, your fourth house, what's going to happen here is that emotion and psychologically, this really deep, intense influx of emotional processing is going to start to come into your life. Okay, it's going to start coming into your life, and you're going to start to become more sensitive. You're going to start to become more aware of the emotional dynamics at play internally for you and for the people around you. You may not necessarily initially actually experience it as, oh, look, I'm starting to learn about all these emotions. You're going to be like, oh my God, why am I getting upset all the time around something? Why am I so sensitive to this? I'm noticing that person's sad, and I'm like, I wonder if that's the right thing. You're going to start to see where emotional abuse takes place. You're going to start to see all sorts of emotions just flood through into your awareness. And that sense of sensitivity around these things is going to start you on a deep process of going into the emotional layering of your life and to begin to process all of the things that have impacted you emotionally. You're going to start to understand the context of your family of origin. You're going to start to go and do things like genealogy and, where did your genes come from and who your ancestors are. You're going to try and understand family constellations. You're going to process your mom. You're going to process your dad. You're going to process your home life. You may even move. Pluto will bring all this to the surface because that fourth house energy is the integration of the self from the perspective of how you relate to the world, where you feel safe. So it's not a surprise during this transit that you become extra sensitive to what feels safe and what doesn't. You become extra sensitive to how you feel in your home and the people around you. And by the end of this transit, you will look back at those 7 years or 6 years or 5 years, depending on how long that Pluto transits your fourth house. And you will actually go, wow, I don't even actually identify with the same person I did before I entered this transit. I've changed so much. That's a big part of what that transit will do, will emotionally change your self-identity into something that is deeply empowering in many ways. So get your surfboard, ride those waves, and enjoy that space, because there are going to be times when you're going to feel very engulfed in emotions. Okay. When Pluto hits the DC, okay, that's that seventh house. Of course, relationships are going to play out for you. You're going to start to learn that the spectrum of how you've related to people is going to become more inflamed. You're going to start to say, hey, I'm actually not really enjoying this relationship anymore. Or, wow, I never realized how numbed out I have been to my codependency. Or, I realized that this aloneness that I feel is not something I want, and I want a partnership. And, what does that look like? The spectrum of relationships is going to become fully illuminated into your life. And so things like, what's the bargain? That's going to change. So like the way that the relationship has been will come into conflict. You'll start to notice more conflict. And that conflict will bring necessary need for psychological processing and then eventually change. You may say, you know what, up until this point in time, I've been doing things like this. This has been my role in the relationship, but I don't want to do this anymore. And that's going to be very uncomfortable, especially if you need that safety in a relationship. You may notice yourself changing. You're going to go through changes within yourself. You're going to go through letting go of certain patterns. You're going to process the original relationship patterns that you had with your mother and father and how they impact your adulthood, right? These types of things will come into play. And you're going to go through, just like with all the other things, states of confusion, states of lostness, states of feeling empty. And then at the same time, you're also going to explore and come into contact with different ways in which relationships can work for you. So don't be surprised during this time that if your relationship does come under stress, it doesn't have to be surrendered to. You don't have to end the relationship, although sometimes that does happen. The renegotiation of what is valuable what your needs are and how you operate in relationships and what you think is fair and not fair comes up for grabs. And you're just looking at it again and saying, oh, that feels outdated, this feels outdated, this feels outdated. This is how I want to relate, this is how I'm going to relate, etc., etc. And that, again, it takes, like, depending on how big your 7th house is, 7 years, 10 years, 3 years. Either way, the transit will change you. Okay. When Pluto hits the 10th house, your position in the world will have a fall from grace. You will have established the blossomed of your sense of identity will be fully integrated in there. You would have been successful, or you would have been doing things in your life. And then all of a sudden Pluto comes along and says, not the same trajectory anymore. And so initially your life changes. Things start to change. You start to find that your relationship to your work is no longer working anymore. And authorities become the people that you find conflict with. You recognize that maybe the desire around what you've been doing no longer has the purpose anymore. And so you progressively let go of it. And in many cases, when people struggle to let go of the attachment, a fall from grace will take place in order to initiate a deep internal introspection of one's own self-identity that gets projected out into the world, to process that. So that when you shift internally here, your direction shifts because of the relationship to your inner eternal self, right? So this Pluto 10th house transit will bring to you an absolute shift in direction in your life, regarding your career, regarding the way that you see things. And you will also, through this process, begin to address underlying fear that comes out of nowhere, right? It's just this fear that comes out of nowhere. And this fear is a pointing towards where there is a need to internalize one's sense of security. Okay, so you're processing your sense of security, how you feel stable within yourself and such. What is the scaffolding that you use in your life to feel safe? Pluto will come along, it will push the bottom of it and say, hey, is this stable? And you'll be standing at the top there wobbling like this going, yeah, no, it's fine, I'll call. And so we're trying to reinforce our control, but really Pluto at the bottom is saying, if this withstands my sort of pushing and pulling, then it's a good structure in your life. If it doesn't and it collapses, rebuild it. Yeah, I know, that sucks. So fear will come up, and that's Pluto underneath the surface kind of pushing these and rattling the cage over here to see if your life is structured and stable in the way that you see it. And it induces deep emotional processing. Pluto in the 10th house will ask you to process the relationship to your father. Pluto in the 4th house will ask you to process the relationship to your mother, but also the father dynamic in different ways. And same with the mother, the parental role. At some point, you will get to a place within yourself where you will start to understand society. You will start to understand how society operates, what's the structure in society, is it healthy, is it not? We as a collective, since 2008, have been going through Pluto transit the 10th house. So Pluto transiting the cusp of the 10th house will initiate these themes. And then for the rest of the time that it's there, your job will change, your position in life will change, your like where you are in society will change. Your relationship to responsibility will change. You will find that you become more aware of duties and responsibilities that you feel are correct versus ones that are not. You will begin to process your underlying sense of judgment that you have on the world, like, you know, how you judge things, how you judge yourself, how we police, things like that. That's a mechanism of safety. And then finally, like I said, processing relationship to like authority, right? You understand the governmental structures, you understand authority in and of itself. And at the end of this transit, you will come to a deep recognition of a hero or heroine's journey that you've been on. Pluto in the 10th house transit is like climbing a mountain. And sometimes you're going to make great distance and you're going to feel like you're accomplishing something. And sometimes you're going to feel stuck at a place for months where you just have to sit and contemplate and process through your feelings and emotions. And then growth will take place. The idea here with Pluto through the 10th house is ultimately self-mastery, right? To come into a deep sense of self-understanding. So that is what happens when Pluto hits the 4 angles and then eventually through the houses itself, okay? And these changes are necessary, they occur, okay? What has it been for you? For those of you that have had Pluto transit at the cusp of your whatever house, like 1st house, 7th house, 4th house, 10th house, when it's transit that cusp, what changed for you? How have you changed when you finished that transit? Okay, so I want to hear about that. Like, share it with me. And lastly, in terms of just the Plutonian experience, remember that Pluto itself does not, we don't solve it with our little sense of identity on the surface over here. Pluto erupts it to the surface and we take time to process it. So understanding Pluto transits is less about trying to figure it out, but more about processing through deep feelings that come through and allowing natural shifts energetically to take place within us. Okay? All right, cool. So this is it for video 2. Video 3, we will look at the Sun, Moon, and Mercury transits. What happens when Pluto hits the Sun? What happens if Pluto hits your Mercury? And such like that, okay? So I hope you got a lot of value from this. Until the next video, take care, everybody. Bye-bye.